two men, Simon Peter and Judas Iscariot, both chosen by Jesus to be one of his disciples.
No. Hold a second. Wait a second. We may have both been chosen, but the comparison stops there. I was nothing like this man.
Okay, let's see. Would you please raise your hand if you worked to make a living and if you were part of a family with a mother and father and others who loved you? Okay. Stand up if you left all of that behind to follow Jesus. Now, please step forward if you stayed with Jesus on the day when so many other people left him because he said that the only way to the Father was through him. Step forward if Jesus ever called you a devil. Peter?
Jesus called Judas a devil because he knew he would betray him. I never understood why he let you stay with us anyway. But Jesus never called me a devil.
Well, Peter, what about that time when Jesus was predicting his own death? What did you say then?
I said we loved him so much we would never let that happen to him.
And then what did he say to you?
Get away from me, Satan.
Step forward if you were there the day that Jesus fed the 5,000 with only 5 loaves and 2 fish, or there when he raised Lazarus from the dead, or cast out demons, or healed the lame. Step forward if Jesus gave you authority to cast out demons and to preach. Step forward if you were ever selfish.
He's definitely talking about you. You were always concerned with money. Remember when Mary washed Jesus' feet with perfume? All you could say was, what a waste that was.
Now hold on. Don't you remember when you told Jesus that you expected something in return for leaving everything behind to follow him?
Well, it seems you've both been selfish. Step forward. Step forward if Jesus predicted that you would betray him and you still did it anyway.
Okay. I sold his location to the high priest for 30 pieces of silver, but how was I supposed to know that they were going to kill him?
And what about you, Peter?
Well, I denied him. That's different. And I wouldn't have had to do that if you hadn't sold him out in the first place.
So denial is different than betrayal?
No.
Peter, do you still think that you were nothing like Judas? You were both guilty. It's what you did with your guilt that separates the two of you.
At least I tried to do something about what I had done. I went to the high priest. I threw the money at their feet, and I confessed my mistake.
Well, and then what did they say to you?
They told me to save myself. I was always more interested in my own comfort than anything that Jesus ever said or did. In the end, it didn't do me any good. I couldn't save myself, and I couldn't forgive myself. So I took my own life.
Peter, what happened after you denied that you knew Jesus?
I cried and I cried. I thought I would never stop. But it's funny, I kept thinking about all the things I'd learned from Jesus, especially how much he talked about the importance of forgiveness. His forgiveness was life to me.
When that happened, when you went back to his welcoming arms, did you believe it?
Nothing was harder than believing Jesus had forgiven me. But eventually I did. his forgiveness was life to me.
Two men, so similar in so many ways, but in the end, so different. Peter heard the message of forgiveness that Jesus preached. Judas did not. One choice led to life. The other choice led to death.
Hello? Here's what we have left. Peter's chair. I wonder if you sat on it recently. You might know that the Latin word for chair is cathedra. When you talk about the chair of St. Peter, if you're a Catholic here, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you travel to Rome and St. Peter's Basilica, you're going to find the throne, the great cathedra of Peter. And when the Pope speaks ex cathedra, he's speaking from the chair of the first bishop of Rome, and that at least is the tradition. But I want to suggest to you that this chair belongs to all of us, meaning no respect, or disrespect, excuse me. That sounds pretty grand that we would all sit there, but it's not. Maybe the chair is grand, but certainly not the men, and certainly not us. When I speak of Peter, I speak of a famous failure. Gobs of guilt, the most famous denier in the world, which is, what's a denier? A disloyal, rotten liar. Denier, liar. Peter's seat, it's a seat of shame, disgrace. I wonder if you have sat in this chair full of shame for something you have done. It's amazing to think about it. When you think about that there's a lot to cry about for a Peter, and he did cry. He wept bitterly, in fact, it says. But there's also a lot to cheer about, which I'd like to talk about the life of Peter and maybe the life of you. If you know the whole story, you know that. The whole story of Peter. Your whole story, I hope. Guilt, true, deep guilt, but grace too. Even more, even deeper, gobs of grace. Great failure, but great forgiveness. Peter's chair is heavy with that. A clean slate, a fresh start for a guilty man, not just shame, redemption. Peter's chair, have you sat in it recently? Guilt and grace. He was warned, Peter was warned, twice he was warned about the three famous denials. Jesus gave him advance notice that the devil is wanting to take him down. Peter, look, our ancient enemy has asked to have you. In fact, to sift you. You know, like wheat in a sifting basket, shaken hard, pressed through the screed, through the stiff sieve, to expose the worst in you. He wants to destroy you, Simon. Or I could call you by the name I gave you, which is Cephas, or Peter, or Rocky. Well, Satan wants to prove you're not as solid as I wanted you to be, not as hot as you think you are, to defeat you by forcing you basically to display how weak you are. Because let's be honest, Mr. Rock, anyone who's been around you, man, for very long has seen you strut your stuff. You're the last person who wants to feel weak. Because you are always trying to be the big man, the better man, the braver man than your gutless buddies. And so we hear you speaking your ego, bragging and crowing. You remember? Think about it. I'll be the water walker. It was impressive, but you didn't think you'd sink. But how about the time Jesus wanted to wash our feet, and you were the one guy that said, well, you'll never wash my feet, because you wanted to be the humble guy. Everyone else is too proud to say, oh, Lord, you're so great, you shouldn't be doing that. Or listen to yourself. Master, everyone else may run like cowards when you are struck down, but not I. You said we will all scatter, but you have me all wrong. I will lop heads off before I will let anyone touch you. I have a sword. I will use it. I have gutted many a fish. I know how to use a blade because I am fearless. I am competent. I am tough. I am loyal. I am not a fair-weather friend. I will die before I will let you die. I will die with you before I will ever deny you. And a few minutes later, Peter is snoring. Snoring. I mean, it's not a sin to sleep at night or to snore. Good news for some of you guys. But his master is deep in the heavy shadows of Gethsemane, and he has asked 3 of his men simply to watch. Please watch. Please stay awake and pray with me. And Peter was one of them, one of our Lord's closest friends. Maybe he wouldn't have felt so badly if he would have just prayed instead of sleeping, if he'd tried being the friend of Jesus that Jesus wanted him to be. Would you guys come and watch with me? My soul is sorrowful to the point of death. I don't want to do this alone. But Peter and his buddies sleep, and Jesus comes back 3 times to wake them up, but they just fall asleep again. In the pitch-dark garden, Jesus sweats profusely, great drops of blood, crying out to his Father, let this cup pass from me, please. And Peter is sleeping. When Jesus first comes back, he singles out Peter. He says to him, Simon, are you asleep? He wakes up, but then he just falls asleep again, and he does it another time. Fails his master 3 times. This is kind of a preview of 3, in this case, 3 wordless denials. And then the soldiers come, and then the Judas kiss, and you know how the story goes, and then the arrest. And so our well-rested Mr. Big hauls out his sword that he's just been itching to use, and he cuts off an ear in defense of Jesus. He plays the hero, even though that's not what the Lord needs right then. He needs a friend, not a bodyguard. You see, Peter could never get his mind around a very important thing about Jesus, and that is the real reason why he even came. Jesus had told them many times. One of the times he said it like this, for the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Not have it taken from him, but to give his life, in spite of all the anguish that would come. On one occasion, Peter actually rebuked Jesus. Far be it from you, Lord. This will never happen. And it's true, this would be an agonizing death, preceded by, a rip your back apart to the ribs scourging. And you wouldn't want a friend of yours going through that. But it was going to happen. And this is Jesus giving up his life. Peter, no one is taking it from him. It is what he has chosen, even if you don't like it. It is the Father's will. And Peter was he just never got that. See what you think of this story. There's an engineer who he had a job of manning the gears of a railroad bridge that was over a rushing river. And his job was to move the levers that would allow these immense gears to actually lift the bridge if a ship needed to go underneath, and then lower the bridge if there was a train coming. He was good at doing that. He brought his son to work one time, and his son was fascinated. All the levers and the knobs and the lights. Couldn't stop asking questions. The dad didn't notice that the questions had stopped until after a ship had passed through, and he noticed his son through the window of the control shed out there on the gears, scrambling around, exploring things. He said, well, that is not good. So he headed out of the shack, and on his way out, he heard the shrill whistle of a train. And his heart stopped because he had an awful choice. The train could come and the train could be lost if he saved his son, but if he ran out and got his son, he would not pull that lever in time. And a lot of people would fall to their death. He knew his duty. He knew his love. And so he headed back into the shed and he reached for the lever and lost his son. That's a powerful story. It has its points. God could not save man without sacrificing his son. He could not save his son without losing the rest of us. The heart of the Father did twist in grief. This is a choice a father should never have to make. But he did. It is sad yet true that the passengers of this world, of history, have whizzed by this scene of heartache, oblivious to the sacrifice going on. But there's a key part of that story that is dead wrong. And it is the part of grace that is the easiest to miss. It is the part that Peter never got until it was all over. The cross is not a tragic accident. It was not the result of a panicking engineer keeping the world from plummeting to destruction. It was not an unexpected catastrophe. It was a deliberate choice. It was not a plan B. It was plan A from the beginning. Prophet after prophet had foretold these sufferings. Isaiah said, it pleased the Lord. It was the Lord's will to crush him, to put him to grief. Isaiah 53, verse 10. It was an essential part, maybe the essential part, of the original blueprint of grace. It means that Jesus planned his own sacrifice. He planted the tree from which the cross was hewn. It means he designed Judas in the womb of a woman, that he engineered the machinery of state that would get Pilate to Jerusalem. It means he chose the nails. Peter will eventually agree how wrong it was for him to resist Jesus going to the cross. He will write in 1 Peter how the slain lamb was foreknown before the foundation of the world. Before time, there was a cross. Before time, there was a lamb. On the day of Pentecost, Peter will preach. This denier man will preach. This is the very first Christian sermon. Jesus of Nazareth was handed over to you by God's set purpose and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. Chapter 4 of Acts, Peter will pray with the church. In this city there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place. All right, back to Gethsemane. Back to Gethsemane, the flashing, ear-splitting dagger of Peter, so brave, so contrary to the will of his cross-bound master, defending his Lord. And yet, in a matter of minutes, he is denying that same Lord. He is crouching in the warmth of a courtyard fire. He is lying to a young servant girl. I don't even know the man. So unbrave. Peter was not aware of how sinfully disloyal he could be. It is an ugly experience to end up doing a sin that you thought you could never do. I don't know if that's happened to you. Maybe a sin that you insisted you could not. Maybe embezzlement, adultery, deserting your family, lying to get a job or to keep one, or something obscenely selfish, or just having lived your whole life thinking it would have some purpose, but realizing that your highest purpose in your life has just been you. Sometimes maybe you have to do something really bad and realize it before you're convinced that you're as lost as anyone. Lord, anyone but me. And then you do it anyway. There's that. You can do something that will convince you how lost you are, how you are sitting in Peter's chair. Peter's chair, chair of shame, chair of failure, chair you don't want to sit in, but you do. A throne of disgrace. Now, before Peter denied Christ, I don't think he was really very convinced he was that bad. Yeah, there was that time remember when Jesus helped him catch a bazillion fish, and Peter sensed the Lord's glory, and he cried out, "Depart from me, a sinner man." But when Jesus tells him about the coming denial, Peter is outraged. Me? I will die before I'll deny. But Peter, he does deny. He does it 3 times before the rooster crows. The Lord looks at him, and Peter weeps bitterly. He melts in tears, water out of a rock. And then he was helpless to prevent his Lord from suffering, and he knew it. And yet something changed. Something happened that changed Peter. Now he knows deep guilt, racking guilt. He knows what it looks like. He has been sifted. But now he must learn what deep grace, racking grace looks like. And it looks like this. This from Walter Wangerin Jr. I saw a strange sight. I stumbled upon a story most strange. Like nothing my life had ever prepared me for. Hush, child, hush, and I will tell it to you. Even before dawn on Friday morning, I noticed a young man, handsome and strong, walking the alleys of the city. He was pulling an old cart filled with clothes both bright and new, and he was calling in a clear voice, "Rags!" The air was foul and the first light filthy to be crossed by such sweet music. Rags, new rags for old, I'll take your tired rags, rags. Now this is a wonder, I thought to myself, for the man stood 6'4" with arms like tree limbs, hard and muscular, and his eyes flashed with intelligence. Could he find no better job than this? To be a ragman in the inner city? I followed him. Curiosity drove me. I wasn't disappointed. Soon the ragman saw a woman sitting on her back porch. She was sobbing into her handkerchief, sighing, shedding 1,000 tears. Her knees and elbows made a sad X. Her shoulders shook. Her heart was breaking. The ragman stopped his cart. Quietly, he walked to the woman, stepping around tin cans, dead toys, and Pampers. "Give me your rag," he said gently, "and I'll give you another." He slipped the handkerchief from her eyes, and he laid across her palm a linen cloth so clean and new that it shined. She blinked from the gift to the giver. And then, as he began to pull his cart again, the ragman did a strange thing. He put her stained, snotty handkerchief to his own face and began to weep, to sob as grievously as she had done, his shoulders shaking. Yet she was left behind without a tear. "This is a wonder," I breathed to myself, and I followed the sobbing ragman like a child who cannot turn away from mystery. Rags, rags, new rags for old. In a little while, when the sky showed gray behind the rooftops and I could see the shredded curtains hanging out black windows, the ragman came upon a girl whose head was wrapped in a bandage, whose eyes were empty. Blood soaked her bandage. A single line of blood ran down her cheek. Now the tall ragman looked upon this child with pity, and he drew a lovely yellow bonnet from his cart. "Give me your rag," he said, tracing his own line on her cheek. "I'll give you mine." And the child could only gaze at him as he loosened the bandage, removed it, tied it to his own head. The bonnet he set on hers. And I gasped at what I saw, for with the bandage went the wound. Against his brow ran a darker, richer, more substantial blood, his own. "Rags, rags, I take old rags," cried the sobbing, bleeding, strong, intelligent ragman. The sun hurt the sky now and my eyes. The ragman seemed more and more in a hurry. "Are you going to work?" he asked a man who leaned against a telephone pole. The man shook his head. "Do you have a job?" "Are you crazy?" the man sneered, pulling away from the pole and revealing the right sleeve of his jacket. It was flat, the cuff stuffed into the pocket. He had no arm. "So," said the ragman, "give me your jacket. I'll give you mine." Such quiet authority in his voice, the one-armed man took off his jacket. So did the ragman, and I trembled at what I saw, for the ragman's arm stayed in his jacket. And when the other put it on, he had two good arms, thick as tree limbs. But the ragman had only one. "Go to work," he said. After that, he saw a drunk lying unconscious beneath an army blanket, an old man hunched, wizened, and sick. He took the blanket, wrapped it around himself, but for the drunk he left a new suit of clothes. And now I had to run to keep up with the ragman, though he was weeping uncontrollably and bleeding freely at the forehead, pulling his cart with one arm, stumbling for drunkenness, falling again and again, exhausted, old and sick, yet he went very fast. On spider legs, he skittered through the alleys of the city, this mile and the next, until he came to its limits, and then he rushed beyond. I wept to see the change in this man. I hurt to see his sorrow. And yet, I needed to see where he was going in such a haste, perhaps to know what drove him so. The little old ragman came to a landfill, came to a garbage dump. Then I wanted to help him in what he did, but I hung back, hiding. He climbed the hill. With tormented labor, he cleared a little space on that hill, and then he sighed. And he lay down, pillowed his head on a handkerchief and a jacket, covered his bones with an army blanket, and he died. And oh, how I cried to witness his death. I slumped in a junked car and wailed and mourned as one who has no hope, because I had come to love the ragman. Every other face had faded in the wonder of this man, and I cherished him. But he died. I cried myself to sleep. I did not know, how could I know that? I slept all the way through Friday night and Saturday and its night too. But then on Sunday morning, I was wakened by a violence, light, pure, hard, demanding light, slammed against my sour face. And I blinked, and I looked, and I saw the first and last wonder of all. There was the ragman, folding the blanket most carefully, a scar on his forehead, but alive. And besides that, healthy. And there was no sign of sorrow nor of age, and all the rags that he had gathered shined for cleanliness. Well, then I lowered my head, and trembling for all that I had seen, I myself walked up to the ragman. I told him my name with shame, for I was a sorry figure next to him. And then I took off my clothes in that place, and I said to him with dear yearning in my voice, "Dress me." He dressed me, my Lord, he put new rags on me. And I am a wonder beside him, the ragman, the Christ. The guilty, humbled, humiliated Peter learns all of this. The Lord's hideous suffering, his Lord's loving death, his Lord's glorious resurrection. This is what changes him. This is grace. He will bravely preach it his whole life till the day he too is crucified on the cross. In his case, upside down, because he said he wasn't worthy to die as his Lord did. The bluster and the swagger, the bragging, the sword and the snore, they're all gone. The grace he witnessed, the Lord of glory impoverishing himself so that he could enrich morally bankrupt sinners like a Peter. He saw it all. And that's how he got past his failure the night of his denial, because Jesus would not let this guilty man go. Now get this, guilt. That's our choice. Grace. That's his choice. Our Savior's choice. The amazing fact of this story is that both men didn't end up like Judas. And why not? No credit to Peter. All the credit goes to Jesus. The chair of grace. Just think about that. Only Jesus could change the chair of shame into the chair of hope because of grace. A life with a future bigger than regrets. Now, Jesus had told Peter something we already talked about, and that is that Satan wanted to fold him. He wanted to shut him down. But I'd only read part of what Jesus told him that night. He said to him, and this is the grace part, the end part, he started out with this, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has asked, demanded, or asked permission to have you, to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you are turned again, what? Strengthen your brothers. Now think about that. There is only one reason why the failure of Peter didn't collapse him like that. He survived his awful failure because his Savior did not fail him. That the prayers of Jesus far outweigh the demands of Satan or any frailties of the Peters of this world. Jesus prayed that his friend, for his friend, that his faith would not fail. He didn't pray that Peter would not fail. He didn't pray that he would not be sifted. He just prayed that his faith at its core would not collapse and that his failure would not be final, that he wouldn't end up like Judas. That his denials wouldn't mean he would never be of any use to Jesus. So Jesus had an assignment. When you are turned again, strengthen your brothers. Because look, all the brothers will need to learn what you learned the hard way, that deep guilt can lead to deep grace. And every person that confesses themselves a deep sinner, a great sinner, has that same message. Anyone that's found forgiveness. Deep guilt can lead to deep grace. Now fast forward a little bit. I'm almost done. Peter is restored on the beach of his old fishing hole, the Sea of Galilee. The very one whom he had denied cooks breakfast for him. And then he asks Peter if he loves him. Very touching scene. I wish I could go through it in detail. Simon, son of John. Simon Johnson. Do you love me? 3 times he asks it. And so the man who denied his Lord 3 times, wow, he is given the opportunity to retract his denials by confessing 3 times, Lord, you know that I love you. This is grace. This is redemption. Guilt and grace. A clean slate, a fresh start. Now, you expected when you came to church on Easter Sunday to hear something about, well, like Jesus dying and being buried and then rising from the dead. And so we've talked about it. It's what preachers do. It's what people who come on Easter Sunday expect to hear. And when you hear all of that, sometimes you just say, well, I heard it all before. 41 Easters, we've been doing the same thing right here. But this isn't just about people long ago. This is about you. You too are more guilty than you ever dared believe, but you are graced more than you ever dared hope if you come to Jesus. And I wonder what it will take for you to believe and really, actually, finally turn to Jesus. British scholar N.T. Wright tells the story of a young man who sneaked into church by the side door one Sunday, and he really wasn't on a quest for God. He was pursuing a stunning girl that happened to sing in the choir. you might have done something like this. And it's an interesting story when you think about it. See, his strategy was to see her after the service and ask her out, hoping that him being in church would impress her. But when he sat down in the back, his strategy started to unravel, his plan, because an usher spotted him and went back there thinking he was somebody else, and he said, and whispered to him, hey, the person that was supposed to read scripture didn't show up. Could you do it? Now, here's a guy who doesn't know a Bible from a banana. But he says yes because I think, wow, I mean, I'm really improving my chances if she sees me actually up there reading the Bible. Well, the time came for him to get up to the podium and actually do it, and the Bible's open to the spot, and it's there in the Gospel of John. And he hears his voice saying this, anyone who doesn't enter the sheepfold by the gate but climbs in by another way is a thief and a bandit. And N.T. Wright says, well, he was thunderstruck. This is what he'd just done. And he was standing there pretending to be a regular Bible reader when, in fact, he had only come there to snag a soprano. So he forced himself to go on, aware of his heart beating. If he was a bandit and a thief, what was the alternative? I am the gate for the sheep, said Jesus. The bandit only comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it full to overflowing. And suddenly something happened inside this young man. He stopped thinking about himself, which is a little scary, and he stopped thinking about the girl, and he even just lost track of the audience out there, and because he, for the first time in his life, started thinking about Jesus, that maybe he was real. And not caring about the decorum of the service, he turned back to the leader of the service, the clergyman there, and he said to him, is it true? Did he really come so that we could have real life, full life like that? And the clergyman smiled and said, well, of course it is, young man. That's why we're all here. You might want to join in the next song and see what happens if you really mean it. And the young man found himself swept off his feet by the presence of the love of Jesus, filling him, changing him, calling him to follow this shepherd who can be trusted to lead you into good pasture and who, in fact, gives his life for the sheep. This young man got far more than he bargained for. Not a date with a soprano, but an encounter with a real loving, eternal Savior. He discovered that the person there in the Bible passage was right there in the room. How about you? How long has it been since you have been swept off your feet by the loving presence of a living, resurrected Jesus Christ? Because he is here right now. He's in the room. He's in a lot of hearts. He is here. Is it possible this Easter morning that he is changing you, calling you to follow him as a shepherd who even gives his life for his sheep, for you? Do you realize that you too can go away with much more than you bargained for, and far more than any of us deserves? Have you sat on Peter's chair recently? A lot to be crying about. A lot to be cheering about. If you know the whole story. Guilt, true guilt, deep guilt, bitter tears, sobs of guilt. But grace too, even more, even deeper, gobs of grace. Great failure, great forgiveness. The chair of St. Peter. I'm going to place it over by the cross. At the end of our service today, I wonder if you consider going up and sitting in it. I'd be happy to pray with you. Amen.